Before a single frame of Season 6 has aired, The Chosen has already confirmed something that is going to break every fan who has followed this story from the beginning. This is not a rumor. This is not speculation. This is coming straight from creator Dallas Jenkins himself. Season 6 is not just another chapter in the story of Jesus. It is the final 24 hours of his life, ending in the crucifixion, and it is going to be the heaviest, most emotionally devastating season this show has ever produced. Jonathan Rumi, the man who has carried the weight of playing Jesus for 6 seasons, has already admitted that filming this season left him in tears months after the cameras stopped rolling. Today, we are breaking down everything that has been confirmed about Season 6, why this is being called the most difficult season the cast has ever filmed, and why Dallas Jenkins himself says this story deserved more than just a season of television. Let's start with the biggest confirmed detail of all, because this single piece of information changes everything about how we should be preparing ourselves for this season. The Chosen Season 6 will premiere on Prime Video on November 15th, 2026, and unlike every season before it, this one is not spread out across months of anticipation before we get answers. The first 3 episodes drop all at once on premiere day, throwing us straight into the story with no easing in, no slow build. From there, new episodes release weekly through December 6th, meaning once this season starts, there is no escaping the emotional weight it is about to deliver week after week. But here's the detail that really changes everything. The season finale, the actual crucifixion itself, is not releasing on streaming at all. It is being held back for a standalone theatrical release in spring 2027. Think about what that means. The creators are telling us, directly and clearly, that the ending of this story is too big, too important, and too heavy to just drop quietly on a streaming platform. It has to be experienced in a theater, surrounded by other people, because the weight of what happens is not meant to be carried alone. Now let's talk about why this season even exists in the form it does, because Dallas Jenkins has been remarkably open about this. According to Jenkins, most people already know the basic outline of the crucifixion story, but very few people actually understand the why behind it, the deeper reasons, and the extraordinary events that filled those final 24 hours. That is exactly what this season is built to explore. It is not simply recreating a well-known ending. It is pulling back the curtain on everything that led to that ending. The politics, the fear, the betrayal, and the personal cost paid by everyone who loved Jesus. Jenkins has said this story deserved not just a season of television, but a full theatrical event, and that the entire season was written and filmed with that theatrical finale already in mind from the very beginning. That is not something you say about a normal season. That is something you say when you know you are building toward the single most important moment in the entire series. And here is where the real emotional weight starts settling in, because this is not just a story about historical events happening to unnamed characters. The official synopsis makes this brutally clear from the very first line. The hour has come, and before the sun sets, Jesus of Nazareth will be dead. Read that again. This is not a season building toward a twist or a cliffhanger. It is a season building toward a death we already know is coming. And somehow that makes it even harder to prepare for. The synopsis goes even further, describing how Pharisees call this justice, Romans call it peace, and his own followers call it murder, while Jesus himself stands resolute, walking directly toward the one place his entire journey has always been leading. That single sentence tells us everything about the tone of this season. Every group surrounding Jesus in his final hours sees his death through a completely different lens, and we are about to watch all of those perspectives collide in the most devastating way possible. But the confirmed details do not stop at the story itself. What makes this season hit even harder is what we now know about the filming process, straight from the cast and crew who lived through it. Filming for Season 6 began back in April of 2025 and stretched across 86 days, making it the longest production in the show's entire history. The crew filmed across multiple locations, including Texas and Utah, but the crucifixion scenes specifically were filmed in Matera, Italy, a location whose ancient stone landscape has stood in for the ancient world in other major biblical productions before. 3 full weeks were spent filming that one sequence alone. 3 weeks dedicated entirely to capturing the most painful moment in the entire story. And according to Jenkins himself, those 3 weeks were the most challenging and difficult the production has ever faced, requiring him personally to surrender everything to the weight of what they were filming. Now think about what that actually means for the people standing in front of the camera, because this is where it stops being just a filming schedule and starts becoming something deeply personal. Jonathan Roumie, the actor who has carried the role of Jesus since the very first season, has spoken openly about how much this specific role has cost him emotionally. He has described going to Mass for months afterward and still feeling himself get emotional, still feeling weepy, just from sharing even a small fraction of what that suffering must have actually felt like. This is not an actor talking about a difficult day on set. This is a man describing something that left a permanent mark on him personally, something he is still processing long after filming wrapped. And if the man playing Jesus was left carrying that kind of emotional weight, what does that tell us about what we, as the audience, are about to feel the moment these scenes finally reach our screens? So here is where this leaves us before a single episode has aired. We know the exact date this season begins. We know it ends with the crucifixion itself, held back for a theatrical release because the story is too significant for streaming alone. We know the official synopsis is already warning us that this is a story of loneliness, judgment, and inevitable death. And we already know that the man playing Jesus was left in tears for months after filming these exact scenes. If Jonathan Roumie himself could not walk away from these scenes unaffected, what does that tell us about what is coming for the rest of us? And if this is only what has been confirmed before the season even begins, how much heavier is it going to feel once we actually watch these 24 hours unfold in front of us? Let's talk about the cast being confirmed for this season, because when you look at exactly who is returning and who is being introduced, it becomes clear just how massive in scale this final chapter really is. Jonathan Roumie is back as Jesus, obviously, alongside Shahar Isaac as Peter, Paras Patel as Matthew, Elizabeth Tabish as Mary Magdalene, Noah James as Andrew, and George Xanthus as John. These are the faces we have followed for 5 seasons, the disciples we have watched grow, stumble, and grow again. But this season is not just bringing back familiar faces. It is expanding the story to include the very people responsible for condemning Jesus in the first place. Richard Fancy has been confirmed to play Caiaphas, the high priest at the center of the trial. Paul Ben Victor has been confirmed as King Herod, and Andrew James Allen has been confirmed to play Pontius Pilate, the man who will ultimately hold Jesus' fate in his hands. Think about what that casting choice means for the story we are about to watch. This season is not just showing us the suffering of Jesus through the eyes of the disciples who loved him. It is putting us directly in the room with the men who chose to destroy him, forcing us to sit with their justifications, their fear, and their power. Now here is where things get even heavier, because Dallas Jenkins has already described the emotional tone of this season in a way that should prepare every single fan for what is coming. He has called Season 6 the biggest season the show has ever produced, without a close second. Not the biggest in terms of spectacle or action, but the biggest in terms of emotional and spiritual weight. And according to Jenkins, the central theme running through the entire season is surrender. Not just Jesus surrendering to what is coming, but the disciples themselves being forced to surrender to something they cannot understand, cannot control, and cannot stop. Jenkins has openly said he wants viewers walking away from this season asking themselves one specific question. Can you surrender even when you do not fully understand why? That is not a light question. That is the kind of question that sits with you long after the credits roll, because it is not really about the disciples anymore at that point. It is about us. And here is a detail that should make every single fan brace themselves before this season even begins. Noah James, the actor who plays Andrew, has already spoken about his personal reaction to simply reading the scripts for this season, before a single scene was ever filmed. He has described spending 2 entire days on his couch, weeping after finishing the material. 2 days. Not from watching finished footage, not from the emotional weight of a completed scene with music and performances layered on top, but simply from reading words on a page. He has called the season brutal, but also surprising, and has suggested it could end up being some fans' favorite season of the entire series, despite how difficult it is to watch. That is an incredibly strange combination of words, brutal and favorite, sitting side by side. But maybe that contradiction is exactly the point. Maybe the hardest, most painful seasons are the ones that end up meaning the most to us, precisely because of how much they cost us to witness. Let's also talk about what we know regarding how this story is actually going to be told, because it is not a simple, linear walk toward the cross. According to the official synopsis, Season 6 captures the events of this single day through multiple perspectives at once, following both the people who loved Jesus and the people who condemned him. That structure alone tells us this season is not going to let us stay comfortably on one side of the story. We are not just going to sit with the disciples in their grief. We are going to sit with the Pharisees in their fear. We are going to sit with the Romans in their sense of duty and order. We are going to be forced to understand, even if we do not agree with, the reasoning of the very people responsible for this death. That is an incredibly difficult narrative choice, because it means the show is not interested in giving us an easy villain to hate from a safe distance. It wants us uncomfortable. It wants us conflicted. And that discomfort might be exactly what makes this season so much harder to sit through than anything that came before it. So think about everything we know right now, before this season has even premiered. We know the structure is unlike anything the show has done before, unfolding across a single, devastating day, instead of a season-long journey. We know the cast has expanded to include the very people who condemned Jesus, not just the followers who loved him. We know Dallas Jenkins is calling this the biggest season the show has ever made, built entirely around the theme of surrender. And we know that an actor who has been part of this cast for years was left weeping for 2 full days just from reading the words on a page, before any of it was even filmed. If reading the script alone was enough to break someone who already understood this story inside and out, what is it going to do to the rest of us, watching it unfold in full for the very first time? Let's talk about what this single day actually contains. Because when you break down what the official synopsis is promising, you start to understand why this season needed to be treated so differently from everything before it. The synopsis tells us plainly that we are watching the historic events of Jesus' final day, seen through the eyes of those who loved him and those who condemned him. That means we already know the shape of what is coming. This is the day of the arrest in the garden. This is the day of the trial before Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. This is the day Peter denies knowing Jesus, not once, but 3 times, before the sound of a rooster crowing seals the moment forever. This is the day Jesus stands before Pilate, and the day that ends with him carrying his own cross toward Calvary. None of these events are new to anyone familiar with the story, but knowing what is coming does not make it easier to watch. In some ways, it makes it worse, because we are not waiting to find out what happens. We are waiting to watch people we have grown to love walk directly into heartbreak they cannot avoid. Now think about Peter specifically, because out of every disciple in this story, his arc is the one that carries the heaviest emotional weight heading into this season. For 5 seasons, we have watched Peter grow into a man of deep, unwavering loyalty, someone who promised he would rather die than abandon Jesus. And now we are heading directly into the moment that promise gets tested in the cruelest way possible. The confirmed casting and synopsis details make clear that this season is not going to soften that moment or rush past it. We are going to watch Peter, the same man who once swore his loyalty out loud in front of everyone, deny even knowing Jesus, while his teacher is being tried a short distance away. That contradiction between who Peter believes himself to be and what fear actually makes him do in that moment is exactly the kind of surrender Dallas Jenkins has said this season is built around. It is not just Jesus who has to surrender to what is coming. Peter has to surrender to the reality of his own fear, and that surrender comes at the cost of everything he thought he stood for. And here is where the perspective shifts we talked about earlier becomes so important. Because this season is not just going to show us Peter's failure and leave it there. It is also going to sit with Caiaphas, with the Sanhedrin, with Pilate, and force us to understand the reasoning behind their choices as well. According to Jenkins, part of the entire purpose of this season is showing us the why behind the crucifixion, not just the basic outline everyone already knows. That means we are going to see the fear driving the religious leaders, the political pressure driving Pilate, and the sense of duty driving the Roman soldiers carrying out their orders. None of that justifies what happens, but understanding it makes the entire story land so much harder, because it removes the comfort of simple villains and simple heroes. Everyone in this story believes they are doing the right thing, or at the very least, the necessary thing. And that is exactly what makes the injustice at the center of it so devastating to witness. Let's also talk about Jonathan Rumi's role in carrying this specific portion of the story, because his own words about filming this season give us a clue about just how heavy these particular scenes are going to feel on screen. Rumi has described the emotional toll of playing Jesus through his arrest and trial as something that has left a permanent impression on him, mentally and emotionally, long after filming wrapped. He has spoken about sharing even a small fraction of that suffering and feeling humbled and moved by the experience. Think about what it takes for an actor to carry that kind of weight convincingly on screen, to portray someone remaining calm and resolute while everyone around him is falling apart in fear, anger, and grief. That contrast between Jesus' steadiness and the chaos surrounding him is exactly the kind of performance that makes an audience feel the full weight of a scene rather than simply watching it happen. So here's where this leaves us heading into the heart of this season. We know Peter's denial is coming, and we know it is going to be portrayed with the full emotional weight that moment deserves. We know the trial before the Sanhedrin is going to force us to understand perspectives we may not want to sympathize with. And we know Jonathan Rumi has already described how deeply these specific scenes affected him personally, long after the cameras stopped rolling. If an actor with years of preparation and understanding of this story could not walk away from these scenes unaffected, what happens when the rest of us watch Peter's promise crumble in real time, knowing exactly what is still coming after it? Let's talk about the ending this entire season has been building toward, because everything we have covered so far, the arrest, the trial, Peter's denial, all of it exists to lead us to one single, unavoidable moment: the crucifixion itself. And here is the detail that makes this different from every other version of this story we have ever seen on screen. This moment is not releasing as part of the streaming season at all. It is being held back entirely, saved for a standalone theatrical release in the spring of 2027. Think about the weight of that decision for a moment. Dallas Jenkins and the entire creative team looked at this single event, the actual death of Jesus, and decided it could not simply exist as another episode dropped quietly on a Friday alongside everything else. It had to be big enough, important enough, and heavy enough to demand its own separate release, in theaters, months after the rest of the season has already aired. That is not a marketing decision. That is a statement about how significant this moment is meant to feel. Now let's think about what we already know regarding how this sequence was filmed, because the details we have are enough to tell us just how seriously this cast and crew treated this specific moment. 3 full weeks were spent filming the crucifixion scenes alone, on location in Matera, Italy, a landscape whose ancient stone architecture has long been used to recreate the ancient world on screen. Dallas Jenkins has called those 3 weeks the most challenging and difficult stretch of the entire production, difficult enough that he personally described needing to surrender everything to get through it. And remember, this is the same season Noah James described being left weeping for 2 full days simply from reading the script before filming even began. If reading it on paper was enough to break someone that badly, imagine what actually standing on that set, watching those scenes get filmed in real time, day after day for 3 straight weeks, must have done to everyone involved. Here is where the emotional core of this entire season really comes into focus, because Jonathan Rumi has been remarkably honest about what portraying this specific moment cost him personally. He has said that even now, months after filming Wrapped, simply going to Mass is enough to leave him feeling weepy and emotional. He has described the experience as leaving an indelible impression on him, both mentally and emotionally, just from sharing even a small fraction, a tiny percentage, of what that suffering must have actually felt like. Think about what it means for an actor to carry that kind of weight home with him, to still feel affected by a role months after the cameras have stopped rolling. That is not a performance he simply walked away from at the end of a workday. That is something that changed him. And if it changed the man who spent years preparing to play this exact role, what is it going to do to an audience watching it unfold for the very first time, with no preparation at all? But here is the part of this story that changes everything. The part that keeps this from being purely devastating with nothing on the other side of it. According to the official synopsis itself, this entire day exists within a much larger plan, one that Jesus walks toward with resolve rather than resistance. He is not simply a victim caught in events outside his control. He is described as standing resolute, walking directly toward the one place his entire journey has always been leading. That distinction matters enormously because it reframes everything we are about to watch. This is not a story about an innocent man losing everything against his will. It is a story about a man